right, good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Magatelli from the Student Doctor Network, and I'm joined by Dr. Emil Chuck, the Director of Advising Services for the Health Professional Student Association, and we are here to answer questions. Dr. Chuck is here to answer questions about leadership experiences. Dr. Chuck, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, we're doing good. I hope everybody is doing fine whenever you're connecting to this presentation, either live or on recording. So hope you're all doing pretty well. I know school's going to is starting up soon enough.
Yeah, I got like 3 days. All right, so any questions that you guys have, please place them in the chat. We'll do our best to get to everything. So to jump right into it, first question, why is leadership so important for aspiring doctors?
So I think a lot of people are attracted to becoming doctors because they see physicians, and we're just going to talk, MDs or whatever, or DOs, as basically the leader, the CEO of an entire healthcare team. And it's not to say that other professions aren't managerial or aren't have some sort of leadership sort of mantle placed upon them. Clearly, we could go and discuss all that for a lot of the other professions. But for the most part, people like the role of being a doctor just because of the conferred sort of respect that one has for doctors among our society, not just as experts in general, but also people who really, at least express some empathy for and advocacy for a community. So I think most people really want to make sure that these are skills that one has, whatever you wind up doing as being a doctor. So do you have that type of experience where you show leadership qualities? And especially in many schools where clearly, if you're going to be serving the community, there are certainly opportunities where you have to demonstrate your leadership skills, at least to make sure that your career is as long as possible. So leadership is a pretty important characteristic, I think, for that particular reason.
Okay. How do leadership skills show up on interviews? What do you look for in a leader?
So there's a lot that's out there, and at least as we're recording it, it's the middle of August. So we have a lot of people who hopefully are going to get onto this webinar or this recording and really try to figure out, what are we looking for in an interview, especially when it comes to leadership skills. I'm going to put something in the chat, so hopefully it'll get there for those of you who are looking at it on live. It's in the AMA article, American Medical Association article, talking about leadership skills 101 for medical students. And so I hope this gives you or anybody a pretty good idea of what type of things confer information about one's leadership skills, and especially during interviews and certainly during the rest of the application too. So when a lot of the pre-professional competencies that I know we are been very familiar with, many of these things can be very well leveraged in leadership positions, and we do want to get a sense of how one does leverage those competencies to really develop one's sort of position as a leader. So if you read off of the AMA, the AMA article that I pointed out, they really focus on 4 or 5 different things. And let's see if you recognize any of these. They want to make sure you are able to collaborate with other people, hopefully like-minded, but also diverse community of people when it comes to working in a team. You also want to make sure you know how to handle conflicts among members of that team as well. So you might get a number of questions of how you would resolve conflicts or how you got along with people who didn't see eye to eye with you. Effective communication certainly is a very important characteristic of anybody who's a leader, because you're going to be communicating messages and visions, advocating for other people. And of course, as I mentioned, being able to establish good relationships among members of the team for collaboration and conflict resolution reasons. So having a pretty good arsenal, a very well kept arsenal of communications tools is going to be very critical. And of course, that's going to be obvious from any interview that you wind up getting. Many of you who might be doing interviews may be very, I hope you're not concerned, but you will likely get some question talking about how you manage stress. And how have you managed stress on behalf of your team is also certainly a point of emphasis when it comes to leadership skills. And certainly, how do you keep everybody together, everyone focused under those circumstances is important. Finally, for the purposes of the article, they talk about present like a leader. And in that case, it's really to have the confidence that you would expect as a leader, whether it's talking to others in a research conference or, you're actually communicating to other people as an effective speaker, communicating information to the public or whatever have you. So those are 5 major areas that I think at the AMA side, and I can pretty much agree with that, really give some pointers towards your potential or your accomplishments as a leader as well.
Perfect. All right, and any questions you guys have, please put them in the chat. How is leadership different from professionalism?
So that's a really interesting question, especially for if those of you who are thinking about, you're going into interviews, and there is a little bit of a difference between leadership skills and professionalism. We just went through like 5 particular characteristics when it comes to leadership skills, at least as articulated by the AMA's articles. You could probably look at all of I think it's the 11 competencies, the AAMC competencies. You can probably get a little bit of an idea that many of them are very, very important when it comes to being, presenting oneself as a leader. I don't think there's an argument that one can make regarding the importance of having integrity and ethics and being a leader. Certainly, a lot of the other issues regarding cultural awareness, cultural humility, I think there's some value in that for anybody who's a leader as well. So, maybe there's something that can be argued that the way the pre-professional competencies are written really point very well towards anybody who wants to talk about being a leader. But leadership in my mind is a little bit more than just being professional, because you can be professional in any sort of circumstance if you're facing patients or you're facing customers. So leadership in a lot of other cases really talks about a goal and talks about vision. Basically, I like to hear people who are leaders who can really articulate how well they overcome challenges or how well they meet goals. In some cases, how they learn from failure as well. And those are not necessarily skills that one talks about under the professionalism competency realm. So I think a very solid understanding of self-reflection and self-analysis, and also being able to, overcome and be resilient throughout all the challenges that you have facing you, which I know resilience is part of the competency list. But I think when it comes to interviewing, you get a pretty good idea, on how people face challenges or can talk about challenges and goals that they've met or exceeded, or even failures one way or another, by the way that one answers questions about it. And that's probably in a very simple way how I could really focus a question more towards the leadership purposes, the leadership qualities as opposed to professionalism and competencies.
That makes sense to me. Again, any questions you guys have, drop them in the chat. I guess I made a typo here. Sorry.
Yeah.
How do I distinguish myself when I have other types of required experiences, clinical, healthcare, shadowing, patient-facing, research, and non-clinical community?
Okay. So I think this is a question that really is a little more related to the fact that all of us who are applying have to fill out, I'm just going to put the example of the AMCAS work and activity section. And the work and activity section in AMCAS likes to have you categorize what your activity is. And so, you only can choose one. You can't choose more than one tag for each of those experiences. So in a lot of cases, some people really sort of get a little bit upset that you have all of their hardwired categories, but you want to emphasize a leadership role somehow or another. So say, for example, you were a TA, you were the lead TA of your biology class that you were teaching or co-teaching or whatever. And so how do you emphasize that? So, I can't say that there's a blanket rule that applies to everybody, but one of the things that I'll tell people is, when you write a regular standard resume for a job, you do want to make sure that you communicate your impact as a member of that team or when you have that position. So especially for impact for anybody who's a leader, remember those qualities that I mentioned before. I would like to know some information about how many people you've had to collaborate with, or any partners that you've had to collaborate with. I'd like to get a good idea of how, the impact that and the productivity that you and your team actually had. If you have a little bit of the conflicts, you may not necessarily put it in your working activities, but that would be something you would probably put in the back of your head and be able to articulate or write down in a secondary essay, or maybe even, be able to hopefully articulate that in any sort of interview that you get. So I think one of the things that I'll tell people is, just like you would on a resume, highlight the responsibilities you had as a leader, highlight the goals, highlight any sort of significant impact, anything that you've actually can say is a success, so an accomplishment of your job in that type of role. So, for example, I'll have a lot of people say, when I was president of such and such a club, we engaged, so many more people that, we went from a club size of about 20 to a club size of about 80. That gives you a little bit of insight into, how much inclusion and how much effort one has had to try to have people align with them, be persuaded to join them in this particular cause. Same thing goes with fundraising, because I think a lot of people, you may not necessarily think, if you were a traditional student, that fundraising is quality, is a quality of leadership. But I think as you get older, you're going to realize that a lot of the people that you are looking at, who are deans and who are certainly in real serious C-suite leadership corporate roles, they're there because they were able to harness a lot of money, or they were able to produce a lot of money on behalf of the organization. And so that's one of the metrics that one uses in terms of being able to assess impact and also to assess productivity. So when someone says, our group raised $3,000 for a cancer charity or something, I actually chalk that up to leadership. And it's not necessarily, an accomplishment under like clinical experience or non-clinical experience. It really is something that, that's an effort to marshal resources on behalf of a non-clinical or whatever volunteering opportunity that you happen to be involved with. So that's one of the things that I'll tell people is that, when I look at anybody who wants to talk about leadership, I look for many of those things. I look for numbers that tells me how productive you are. Anything that's measurable is really helpful. So how many students did you actually tutor? When it came to, your team, that's a TA team for your biology class. How many TAs are we really talking about here? How many hours did you guys spend to produce worksheets? And, how often did you actually meet with each other to really get a sense of how well you were all progressing as a team? Those are just the little things here and there that, I think anyone who has a little bit of managerial experience recognizes it's an important part of leadership.
Again, any questions you guys have, please put them in the chat. We'll do our best to get to them. So next one, are leadership opportunities in clinical settings better than others?
So that's a very loaded question. I will put it that way, because I think many of you who are thinking about applying to medical school or health professions programs, you realize that, clinical positions, clinical opportunities are pretty much, expected of you as an applicant. So is it okay for you to be a scribe? Is it okay for you to be a medical assistant? Or maybe you can go to become, a leader within that type of organization. So you're the chief trainer of a group of scribes or whatever. So I don't know if I would necessarily call it better. I think the evolution and your ability to communicate to anybody who's reviewing your application just the type of trust an organization has given to you or bestowed upon you to consider yourself a leader, or you got to have additional responsibilities to help onboard other people, to help kind of supervise them or stuff like that. I think those opportunities, especially in a clinical setting, are pretty important, and as they are a little rare. Everyone will talk about being a little bit more hands-on with patients, and obviously you can't be as hands-on with patients for most of you, but you can do a lot to work, again, collaborate with your entire team, effectively manage conflict, and certainly impart information about communicating if we're talking about scribing. Those sorts of things are really important, and certainly for the value of a clinical experience for an application to medical school or something like that. I mean, I think it wouldn't hurt you. It's definitely something that you can show to others that you understand what it's like to work in a clinical setting. And it's not foreign to you to know how to navigate within that setting, and that people tend to trust you for your productivity, your engagement with other team members, your interest in hopefully, your success in being, the type of, if it were scribe for that example, to being the type of scribe that you can be. So I think, I don't know if I would call it better. I don't think that being like a chief scribe is any better than being president of another, your nonprofit organization, or someone who's a board director or a member of the board of some nonprofit. I don't know if there's any that you could say weighs better than others. It's totally subjective, and it totally is up to you and what you got out of that, your relationship with that organization. That's what ultimately becomes the matter. Is like, well, if you became the head TA of a biology class, how much enthusiasm were you really involved in it? How much did you take that experience very seriously? That's something that would be of interest, because if you're just kind of going through the motions, is that really what leadership is all about? Hopefully it's not. Though maybe you've seen and have had examples of people who pretty much got their leadership position and really did not do so much or do as much as you would want them to do. So just making sure you know that. So I hope that answers the question.
All right, next question. Does being in charge of an independent research project show leadership?
Now that's an interesting question too, because I think there's a lot of people will talk about being involved in a lab setting, and that, there's an argument that should be made. If I drafted my own research project and did my own experiments, that should qualify as being leadership. I don't know. I kind of waver a little bit, and it really depends on what, again, qualities you really are trying to emphasize. It's not the research itself that we're looking for that says leadership to it. So just because you're able to run a number of experiments on Western blots, do PCR, do all these sorts of, grow yeast 2 hybrids, or, take care of zebrafish or mice, it doesn't necessarily tell me that you're exhibiting leadership. Usually leadership involves a team, and that you're either leading the team, hopefully you're mostly going to be leading the team, or you're at least part of some sort of collaboration where your contribution is valued. So that's something that's really key. So if your research project, it gives you an opportunity to work with a fellow undergrad or some sort of lab technician, and I don't know if you happen to be supervising them, but certainly a very close collaboration would be appropriate. Then you could probably argue a little bit of the leadership skills that you've built in the process of having to have that project. So again, remembering what the AMA says, highlight where you're part of a team. Highlight the opportunities where you as an entire team try to problem solve as best as you can. You had something, you had an unexpected bad result, but your controls are bad. So how do you go through the process of assessing what actually is the problem with other people? Certainly managing stress is a very important piece, as I mentioned, with the AMA notation. So, tell us about a time where it was really stressful in that research project, or in that other set of examples that you actually have. So I think people like to think about the importance of, quote, being the boss on an independent project or anything else like that. I mean, yeah, sure. I can probably take a little bit. I can accept that a little bit, especially if you bear most of the burden of communicating your results and going to presentations or doing whatever that you need to do. Yeah, then if there's appropriate responsibility, yeah, I can argue that you probably have some leadership skills that are developed with your independent research. But it doesn't happen for everybody, because it just depends on the investment that you're allowed to have on the project in the first place. So, it's not just a blanket statement, that, having a research project that you ran all by yourself gives us any insight about you being a leader. It probably does give a little bit, but it's not gonna put a gold star next to it. It probably won't put a gold star next to your name.
All right. Again, any questions, please put them in the chat. Does forming a new club or nonprofit prove my leadership competency?
Okay, so this is also a very interesting point, and I think a lot of people who apply, certainly to medical school, like to make it very clear in one of their work and activity sections that, while they were an undergrad, they formed this nonprofit association or nonprofit organization where they're doing a lot of fundraising so that, we could, I'm just putting this as an example, we can deliver shoes to an orphanage in some other remote country outside the United States. And that's, certainly perfectly a very good cause. Forming the club in and of itself or being part of the founders group, does it tell you anything about being a leader? Maybe. I think, as I mentioned, your impact really tells me more about your capacity to lead. If you are able to articulate why you formed that nonprofit organization in the first place, what caused you to move forward and convince other people to, at least invest in or support your nonprofit so that you can do the things that you get to do. Thinking about, how you're growing your organization. Those sorts of things can probably give me a little bit better idea of, what exactly your leadership skills are. How did you manage the coordination of communication so that everybody's on the same page, especially as you're building your organization or you're able to build your organization? How do you change your logistics? If it were the case of, how do you box shoes and send them to that other remote place somewhere around the world? So, I think those are things to think about a little bit about how you describe forming a club as being, an opportunity to discuss leadership. Really, as I mentioned, your impact is very important. Like, how many shoes did you actually send out, and roughly how many children or how many families or whatever are affected by this, and over how long of a period of time? When you learn how to speak and talk like a leader, these sorts of examples should hopefully become much more apparent when it comes to talking about how being part of this club or being a board of this other organization shows some semblance of your ability to be a leader. So, again, I think it's anything innovative certainly is helpful. But again, in and of itself, just because you have a really great idea doesn't mean you have the leadership skills to carry it through and to execute it in a way that you reach certain goals that, hopefully show that your project or your idea was really successful. So don't just, there's so many pre-med or pre-health applicants who just talk about, the impact that they made by forming a club. So I will put in a little bit of a word about it. It's like, and there's, I'm not going to argue too much with anybody who forms a club to, send shoes out to a different country or anything like that. Well, one of the things that's remarkable to me is leaders also know how to collaborate with existing organizations. And one of the challenges that comes from, saying that you founded a new club is that I sometimes wonder, did you ever find out if there were other people who are much more well-established, have better networks, have better infrastructure? Are they doing what you're doing? Or would they be interested in sort of working with you so that you achieve whatever goal that you have? It's not that, a lot of people who write about their nonprofit really talk about it as something in isolation. And if I wind up doing a little bit more work, I find that if they really wanted to be a little bit more effective, a little bit more impactful, they could have partnered with another nonprofit organization that already exists, that already can do all this stuff. So I'm a little surprised every once in a while when, students don't think about that. And I'm sure there are many applicants who find, who establish their own nonprofits that probably get asked in interviews, well, or don't other organizations do what you're doing? And what do you really know about other people who hopefully can join you in the fight? I don't know whether a lot of applicants really have done that type of homework. So if you are in that type of position, make sure you do your homework, make sure you collaborate with others. You might be pretty surprised how some other people might be a bit further ahead than you are, and so that you don't have to create everything new. I also will point out that if you created a new organization before you start medical school, I will ask, what are your plans once you start medical school? Because you're probably not going to be doing that nonprofit at the same time you're just trying to do well in medical school. So that also tells me a little bit about your leadership skills too, because an exit strategy, as it were, I think is really clear and important for anybody in a leadership position. So those are very important pieces that I think people really need to think about.
Okay. Do titles matter when it comes to leadership? Do I get more credit as president versus treasurer?
I think a lot of people think you do. I don't think so, and I don't know if I think part of it again goes back to impact. I say this because there's some schools that I know that I've visited in the past where the number of people who are pre-meds is so large, is a class as a proportion of their undergraduate class, that I can visit. When I was recruiting, I visit campus, and there were like 4 pre-med clubs. Each of them are doing, they're all pre-med, but they're all doing something very different from each other. Like there's 1 or 2 that will be affiliated with different like global health opportunities, or maybe a domestic health opportunity, something with community, or whatever happens it is. I know that a lot of people believe that, again, forming a club or being an executive board member or officer of any organization, and there's only so many seats in that, is just so valuable. And I'm like going, well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of easy to say that, you were chosen or elected by people who were in your club to be in that role. And that's an important piece. But do you get more credit as a president versus treasurer? I think you have to boil it back down to what is your impact. As president, what are you able to do? What are you able? You're representing your club membership, but the treasurer does too. All those executive leaders do. So I'm kind of a little. I don't think titles matter as much. I mean, again, we can go to the military and so forth and just say, does being a captain is that much more important than being a lieutenant? I mean, obviously, probably in the military, yeah, there's some value in that. But I think when it comes to if you're career changing and you're trying to get into a health professions program, I think there is a little bit of meaning for people who know behind how much it takes in order to get up to a certain rank in the military versus others. So there might be something to be said if you really spent the time and you really put in the effort and the work to get the type of recognition that you do as part of an organization. So hey, if you get credit, that's great. But I do think that everybody inherently is a leader in some fashion or another. So everyone has the ability to think of a vision, set some goals, try to collaborate with other people to reach those goals and hopefully meet or exceed them. I hope that everybody believes they have that ability, whether you get into medical school or another health profession or not. And there's clearly plenty of people who did not go to medical school who have some modicum of leadership skills that's out there. So I don't think it really necessarily matters in terms of what title you get.
It sounds like being able to speak to your experience is the most important part. All right, any questions you guys have, again, please put them in the chat. How can I get the best letter of recommendation that emphasizes my leadership skills, especially when only my peers have witnessed what I do?
That's one of the risks, I guess, of running your own nonprofit or any sort of organization, founding your own club. I mean, maybe if you found your own club at a university, you may have a faculty sponsor that might, be a little bit more micromanagerial than not. Most of them are just going to stay hands off, I would suspect. But we get a lot of questions about what do we do? We're president of such and such a club. I would really love to have a letter attesting to what my leadership skills are in that club. Should I ask, I don't know, should I ask one of my fellow executive officers to write this letter? I think you can kind of guess this is a problem for many people who really are trying to see, I want to show I have leadership skills, but my peers are on the board and, they know what I've done better than anybody else. So I wish there were a good answer to that. And that's something that you really want to think about very carefully. Who are the people who are not on the board, who at least have some sense of judging and evaluating, what your club actually did, and hopefully be able to write about it. I don't know who the best person would be under those circumstances. It may or may not be that faculty advisor. It may be other collaborators that your organization works with when it comes to achieving a particular goal. So say, for example, and I think a lot of people will do Relay for Life or something like that. Whoever is your local chapter manager with whom you've connected to do your Relay for Life program, maybe if that person feels willing, that person who hopefully you've worked with a bunch would be willing to write a letter of recommendation. So I think part of it is it's not the person directly managing you. It also can be people who hopefully are not your peers, but people that you are partners with and are collaborators with, who are professionals, who can really, who agree that they can write a good, strong letter for you, talking about your leadership skills, the impact, what you and the other organization does together to address whatever the challenge is that you both have agreed to address. So, I mean, those are things that I would tell you to try to really think very carefully about when it comes to finding someone who writes you a letter, because it doesn't look good to have your peer, I'll have my vice president write a letter of recommendation on my behalf, and I'm either the president or the treasurer or whoever else. It doesn't really feel great as a rule of thumb on that side. So I would certainly say be very mindful and be very thoughtful. And for those of you who are thinking about applying next year, think about it now. Who would you have write your letter of recommendation that says you're a great leader? It would be, again, cannot be a peer. It, can be somebody who really knows you well. And if it's someone that you partner with, the partner organization, whoever's in charge of it, whoever has direct connections with you and sort of collaborating together, would likely be your best choice under those circumstances. So, just, make some sense about it. And if you have any questions about it, ask your reference or your potential reference. Talk to them is a very good, that's usually a really good piece of advice. Is like, if there's a person that you really want to make sure writes you a strong letter, how much have you talked to that person? How much does that person know you? Again, how does that person see you as a leader? Those are things that will be included and should be included on the letter. So that's, in my mind, one of the better ways to get the best possible letter of recommendation. You want someone who has some leadership credibility, someone hopefully that you worked with, that can really attest to the fact that, hey, you're the type of person that I think I would love to work with if you become a doctor. What better letter can you probably have from that? There might be a few, but not too many that I can think of.
Yeah, that's good advice. Absolutely do not have your peers write your letters.
I know it sounds dumb, but those are questions that come up on the forums all the time. It's like, what do I do? My faculty advisor doesn't know me. Maybe I can have, this other, my co-president write me a letter. I'm like, no, please don't do
that. Yeah. Everything Dr. Chuck said. Yes.
There's some truth to some of the things I'm saying. After all, yes.
There's a good reason why it's so important to build positive working relationships with outside organizations or your professors or Yeah. So any questions, again, drop them in the chat. We got some time here. The last one we have for right now, should I pursue business courses to improve my leadership skills? You should pursue those if you want to get really good at using Microsoft Excel.
And I think it depends on what you're taking the courses for. I think there's some interesting value in business courses in some cases. I can't attest to every single possible business course you would ever take. But I think I answer this for so many people who want to tag on or hook on an MBA on top of your degree. I want to do an MD MBA, a DDS MBA, or whatever MBA. Does having the MBA automatically like certify you as a leader? I would argue no. It just gives you a degree, and that might position you better for certain other leadership type positions, but it doesn't mean that just because you have that position, you're a true leader or a better leader in that type of role. There's a lot of complexity of that you can go into that. I mean, I think one should be aware of a lot of what we're talking about when it comes to running a business and the interpersonal connections that happen when it comes to running a business. Also, whatever you need to do intrapersonally, but I think you find that most places like Harvard Business Review, their publication, and so many other psychology review places that really focus on human relationships, really focus on one's leadership capacity when it comes to working with others and making others feel safe, making others feel respected, valued, whatever you want to talk about that. Do you need a business course to do that? Not necessarily. And I think there's certain things that probably business courses can give you, which is certainly a different perspective in looking at a problem. Understanding how really how we finance business, or all the stuff that happens with regards to profit acquisition, whatever else. If you're really interested in that sort of stuff, especially if you ultimately want to do venture capital for medical innovation or innovation devices or something, maybe that's probably one of the reasons why that group of professionals I talk about add on in the MBA as well. But I don't think you necessarily need the business courses at this point if you're trying to enter medical school to really show you've got leadership skills. Now, for those of you who are really, who are applying and do have business degrees, understand how you leverage it. In a lot of cases nowadays, business major undergrads, and just as much as the MBA programs too, for sure, the way that they teach classes is very much, or I would argue in many cases, rather similar to how medical schools teach their students too. And I say this because a lot of the terminology that you hear about case-based learning, about flipped classroom, about small group problem-based learning discussions, that's like practically everywhere in undergraduate business education. So I think for those of you who, sure, you may not have the science in business school or in any sort of business, in any sort of undergraduate business major, unless you tack it on yourself. But there is something to be said about the way you are taught and you're educated in most of your undergraduate business courses. I'm setting aside all the quantitative ones. Actuarial sciences, I'm sure you probably don't want to go into that. It's just, tons of numbers and other stuff like that. But, I think they do teach a little bit of that too. Having to know what it's like to work with people, and also handle conflict resolution. In general, yeah, those other leadership qualities can help. But do you need to take classes in order to do it? I mean, that's pretty arguable, unless you really know that's what you absolutely see yourself doing as a physician. It's kind of hard to argue for that.
All right. So, Dr. Chuck, those are the questions that we have. Just ran through them. Are there any final notes or anything else that you'd like to touch upon?
Let me see. I mean, I think for a lot of people who are leaders, I think one of the challenges that come across is, there's being a leader and having a very, sharp vision, and there's being a leader, and just, I don't know how to say this other, nicely, other than to just say, you just basically have an opinion, and you just feel that your opinion counts. It's the only one that matters, and who cares about everything else? So I think we're living in weird times where there are so many leaders that don't really consider other people's perspectives. They, may not necessarily value expertise in the exact same way that I think should be, or respect expertise the way that it has been or should be as well. So I think one of the things that I think being a leader also involves is a sense of really understanding, making a difference between what your vision is, if it's goal oriented, if it's people oriented, if it's resource oriented. So, I mean, you have plenty of people who are going to be resource oriented. It's like, we can't go into debt, we can't overspend. You have a lot of people who are goal oriented in that, you want to hit this mark in terms of how much money you're making, how many likes you have on your social media account, those sorts of things. And certainly people oriented, I mentioned before, you make all the people on your team and the people who work for you feel like they're valued or respected or whatever. There's times where all three of those major ideals come into conflict with each other. And so how do you deal with that? I think is a really important question to have, because it's going to happen to you. That's going to be part of your education in medical school, is knowing how you handle those types of conflicts, because you're going to get into them. You're not going to get along with every single person who is your preceptor or your attending or whoever, more senior resident or whatever have you. Whatever you wind up doing, your personalities are just going to conflict. And whoever is your supervisor is just going to stay focused on the real goal, which is you got to hit your productivity mark. You got to save this much amount of money, and that's why we're cutting these many positions or not buying this much stuff. And whether you like it or not, especially in business, it's like your product can be cut because we just don't have the money, or the company decided to go in a totally different direction. I certainly will appreciate, and I appreciate all of you guys that have gone through the military. If you have to understand just the frustrating part of having to deal with the bureaucracy and having to develop your own leadership skills, it's not just your leadership skills of certainly achieving a goal that you're happy about. You problem solved your way through it. I think certainly of those of you guys who've had military background, really understand what it's like to be in an ambiguous state, not be told anything and why you're doing it. And certainly, sort of having you, be forced to think, no, you have to think of the goal. You don't think of yourself or don't think of other little things. And so I think that type of switch that occurs among those of you who've had military background is really remarkable. And I think it's something that will help you later on and when you navigate your own medical education journey, because it's not going to be easy for you. I mean, you're not going to get along with everybody in all your clerkships. And so, how that affects the type of career you're going to want to pursue or you're able to pursue. That's something that I think a lot of people don't really understand until you actually have to go through it. So I think that's one thing that I'll probably remark for sure, is like, make sure that you really understand leadership is not about all the successes. It's also about all of those very frustrating moments. It's those failures. It's those things that you're just things just aren't going to work out. What do you do? How do you cut bait? So good luck with that.
Yeah, I can think of quite a few times in the military where I was a leader because I was ordered to be, and I got a team of people that didn't like each other and didn't want to be there doing what we were doing. How do you get everyone to come together and execute on the task? And if you're hard up for leadership experience, go into the military. You will lead whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and I think a lot of small groups, especially if you're talking freshman or sophomore classes, and we're just going to randomly assign you to a group of other people in your, and you're going to write a lab product a report together. I know. Good luck with that, especially if you are assigned into a group. Whether you are assigned into a group as its leader, so you're responsible for making sure everyone does their part in writing your group lab report. No one's cheating. No one's. I mean, now I can say no one's over relying on AI bots to sort of write things up. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable about how you still are responsible for the mistakes made by others that are in your charge. So be prepared for that, because I think for the most part, if most pre-med students are just so afraid to talk about failure, so afraid to talk about what it's like, when it's not your, when it's somebody else's fault. It's not my fault that so and so just wasn't prepared or something. That's the type of maturity we really are looking for in medical school. And again, this goes back to the question: is it leadership or professionalism? Obviously, there's going to be elements of both. But being a leader certainly is all about accepting responsibility. Knowing that if you are the leader, you are where the buck stops. And whatever happens, happens. And whether we have fantastic leaders currently in various roles, government or non-government and industry or not, you've got to develop your own leadership style. You certainly have to have an idea of certain role models that you want to emulate and why. But they all have gone through the similar trials of dealing with people that, what do you do, with people who don't agree with you? And, you have who has power, who doesn't have power. If you don't have power, how do you convey bad news to someone who does have power and wants to fire you if you decide that you didn't give them the answer that they wanted, or you didn't give them the results that they wanted? How do you deal with that? So you'd be very surprised how all of that is pretty relevant for you once you get into medical school and you continue on that journey through your residency and so forth. It's quite amazing.
That makes sense to me. All right. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. Hope everybody's been able to learn something that are going to be able to apply to their applications, be it this cycle or in the future. Dr. Chuck, again, thank you for your time. And we will see you guys. Is it next week or 2 weeks out?
Oh, it's quite a few. We're gonna take the break until I believe the next Sunday after Labor Day. So, by that point, many of you probably will have started school. So thank you and congratulations on that. I think we're coming back. I think the date is September 7th. So the Sunday after Labor Day. For many of you, that would be 1 month before, at least hopefully you'll have your interviews in tow by that point. So good luck to all of you who have to do that. And, it'll be 1 month before first offers come out, for at least on the medical school side. So yeah, time is running really fast.
I don't want to think about it. It's making me, giving me, nah. I'm all right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and I'm not as well versed on the TMD SAS pre-matches at all. I'm like, oh yeah, there's the pre-match announcements that come out at some point. So, yeah, no big deal.
All right. So next time we see you guys, I will ideally not panic whenever I hear the word interviews. All right. Thank you. All right, Dr. Chuck, have a great night, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Good night.